Well, President Trump's been incredibly supportive of the tech industry. I mean, like they haven't seen before. Biden was imposing all sorts of unnecessary regulations. I think the tech industry is very happy with President Trump and the performance of this administration. I haven't heard any of the negative sentiment you're talking about. But look, are there CEOs who are longtime Democrats who've always been the Democrat Party? Yeah, of course there are. And some of those people don't like President Trump, and they never will. But the ones I talk to who are happy about the business environment, they're very happy with the performance of this administration.
That was the former White House AI and crypto czar David Sacks speaking to CNBC's Squawk Box at the World Economic Forum in Davos this past winter. He was responding to Andrew Ross Sorkin's reporting that CEOs and business executives are much more critical of the Trump administration when they are off camera due to the fear of possible retaliation. Now, Sacks is the focus of a new piece by our next guest, staff writer at The Atlantic, George Packer. The piece is titled "The Venture Capital Populist: How David Sacks and the New Tech Right Went Full MAGA and Captured Washington." The article went online this morning and will be in this month's issue of The Atlantic magazine. It's a great piece. George, thank you so much for joining us. So chart for us, if you will, a little bit of this evolution and how the tech world, which, you know, in Trump's first term was fairly skeptical of him, came on board in a huge way to the point where they're contorting themselves to defend some of his behavior in order to stay on his good side.
Well, Silicon Valley has for decades wanted nothing to do with Washington. It wanted to be left alone, to work its magic, to change the world, as the slogan went. And so the politics of the Valley were a sort of soft libertarianism, support for gay marriage, pro-choice, pro-immigration, but keep your regulations off us and keep our taxes reasonable, and we will put money in your coffers. And that began to change when Trump came in 2016. There was one leading figure who very visibly backed Trump, and that was Peter Thiel. 4 years later, Biden comes in and begins to alienate some of the CEOs in Silicon Valley with antitrust enforcement actions, with regulatory moves. There really wasn't a whole lot of actual teeth, but it was the vibes that changed. And suddenly a whole sector of the tech world that became known as the tech right starts to become vocal, led, I think, by Mark Andreessen, a leading venture capitalist and co-inventor of the internet browser. And Andreessen, Thiel, and Sacks began to gather other tech leaders around to support Trump because they thought Trump would be the industry's man. And Sacks threw a big fundraiser in 2024 that kind of sealed the deal. And within a few months, he's in Washington at the White House as Silicon Valley's man in the Trump administration.
So on David Sacks, George, you point out in the piece that years ago, David Sacks had described the January 6, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol as an insurrection and pronounced Trump disqualified from ever again holding national office. What Trump did was absolutely outrageous, he said, and I think it brought him to an ignominious end in American politics, he said on his podcast a few days after the event. He will pay for it in the history books, if not in a court of law. These might seem like tricky positions to climb down from, but the path that leads from scathing denunciation through gradual accommodation to sycophantic embrace of Trump is a well-worn pilgrimage trail. Opportunist doesn't really describe Sacks. He doesn't come across as slippery or two-faced. There's no evasive glance or roguish smile. He can argue at great length in a steady silent drone with an aggressive debater's ability to make an evidence-based case for any position he holds. But the position always happens to coincide with his benefit. The only consistent principle of his career is a ruthless devotion to self-interest. At least that's some pretty good writing.
Very good writing, but also a pretty ruthless description. And you do paint this portrait of complete self-interest as being the number one driver of the architects of our future, essentially, and the great unknown abyss that we are floating into right now without any regulation, any guardrails with this AI era. So what do you see as coming from this unchecked, unfettered support of the Trump administration for the industry titans?
I think Sachs saw in Trump someone who would do the industry's bidding. Why? Because Trump has a soft spot for plutocrats. As one of my sources said, Sachs is a spirit animal for part of the president's brain. And I said, which part? And he said, the plutocratic part. In other words, although Trump's road to power was through the white working class, through populism, that never fit him very well. And now what we're seeing is MAGA beginning to break into pieces. And one piece is the tech right, who were all on the dais at the inauguration, and some of whom are now in the president's advisory commission on science and technology, and who can get their meetings at the White House whenever they want. Another part are the populists, like Steve Bannon, who has scathing things to say about David Sachs because he thinks Sachs is leading Trump to betray his base. And I think AI, so several people said to me, AI will be the biggest issue of the 2028 campaign. It sounds slightly conjectural now, but when you think of how fast it's developing, how powerful it is already and will become, and the warnings coming from within the AI companies, and no federal regulation whatsoever. This is all being done by the private sector without a hand from government. Well, yeah, it's quite possible, and it could be a problem, mainly for the Republican Party, because Trump has so aligned it with the tech sector. But the Democrats are not out of the woods because the public doesn't trust the Democrats on AI either. It's a kind of populist versus elitist issue, and we'll see which party is able to get on the side of popular fears and anxieties about AI, and also resentment of how much money is pooling upward into the hands of a very small number of tech investors and CEOs.
I'd personally argue that the AI explosion is the worst possible time right now with this administration in charge. And it'd be very interesting to watch that 2020 campaign. And if a Republican were to not hold the White House next, how this industry would recalibrate. The new piece, fascinating, available to read online now, and will be in the upcoming issue of The Atlantic. Staff writer at The Atlantic, George Packer. George, always great to see you. Thank you.